This video has two parts. This is part 2. If you didn't see part 1, please watch it first. If you saw part 1, then never mind and continue. I kind of racked my brains as to where I was going to start with part 2. And I really gave it a lot of thought, and I thought of one particular incident, seemingly innocuous at the time. And, well, I think this was the precursor to what was to come. Okay. I was out on southbound I-75 at approximately the 102.5 mile post, and I was working a completely different fatality. That green arrow points to me in my patrol car. All right, well, it's a replica of my patrol car. Anyway, it's not uncommon to hold several cases at one time. As a matter of fact, I've had as many as 10 and 11 running at the same time. Talk about stress. As I sat in my car working on that case, unbeknownst to me, a Collier County Sheriff's Department patrol car pulls up behind me. The next thing I know, my right front door opens up and one of their traffic homicide people jumps into my car. I knew exactly who she was because we all kind of run into each other at various scenes, and we all get along pretty good. I then said, "Hey, what's going on?" And she goes, "Hey, Bob, I'm just curious as to what you got for a speed on that fatality with our deputy." Well, I told her, I said, "Hey, you're not going to like what I'm going to say, but I've got your deputy at 114 miles an hour. And she went, "What? What, are you kidding? I have him at 77 miles an hour. And I said, "How do you have him at anything? I'm the only one with the numbers, the physical evidence, the documentation. How do you come up with 77 miles an hour? You can't come up with anything." And she goes, "Well, I just think you're way off." She gets out of the car in a huff, and off she went. Oh, and by the way, I know exactly where she got that 77 miles an hour. The deputy told her that. Well, I have an interview with him because I did interview him, and he said he did between 70 and 75 miles an hour. So even those speeds don't match between the 77 and the 70 to 75 miles an hour. Let me just say this. In 2 seconds when I arrived, I knew that was not a 77 mile an hour crash. The next thing I did was I went to the sheriff's department, to their impound yard, because they were going to remove the information from the airbag control module. And if you don't know what that is, that's kind of like a black box in an airplane. And it records all kinds of event data. For example, if you slam on your brakes, that's an event. If you suddenly accelerate, that's an event. And maneuver the car in any kind of abrupt way, that's an event. It also records the whether you're wearing your seatbelt. It gives you the time, and it gives you all kinds of data in there. So that's why I went to the impound yard, and I talked to the sheriff's department, and their homicide people were there removing the data, and they told me, they said, "There's nothing on there." I go, "What? There's nothing on the recorder?" And they go, "No." And they acted like they were surprised too. And I said, "Well, what are you going to do?" And they said, "Well, there's nothing you can do. It's just not there." And I said, "Okay." I'm like, that's the first time this has ever happened to me. But I mean, I didn't know at the time They just were flat out lying to me. And it just never occurred to me they would lie about something as simple as that. And, well, that's what they did. But I didn't find out till later on. And you will know exactly how I knew later on in this story. So the next thing I did was I went to my patrol car, and there's some guy over there kind of waiting for me, and I knew who he was. He was an investigator for the insurance company for the sheriff's department. And I'm pretty sure he was also a traffic homicide investigator at one time with the Florida Highway Patrol. And I knew the guy, and I go, hey, and he goes, hey, Bob. He goes, I have a question for you. And I go, okay. And he goes, well, I have a question about the speed of the car. And I said, okay, which car? He goes, well, you came up with 114 miles an hour. And I don't know how you came up with that. He goes, because my speed's not even close to that. I go, you have a speed? I go, hang on for a second here. So I went in my car, and I had the folder there, the file, and I put it on the trunk of my car, and I opened up the reconstruction diagram, and I showed it to him, and I said, well, what is it about this that you seem to think the speed is not correct? And he points to where the red car's final rest was. And he said, well, I don't know how you came up with 114 when that guy only traveled 157 feet. And I'm like, no. That's the distance for final rest for the patrol car. That red car, that's 277 feet. And he goes, oh, okay. So apparently they deceived him as well. And you know what? Frankly, I didn't need the speeds off of that data airbag control module, because I already had the speeds from using two different methods, manual measurements and through photogrammetry, and they both confirmed each other. The airbag control module would have provided a third confirmation, I guess, but this is how things went. Well, I gathered all my information and went to my sergeant with it, stood in his office, and he said, wow, okay, let's call the sheriff's department and give them a heads up so they know where we're at with the investigation, because it wasn't, looking real good for them. And so that's what he did. I stood there as he called, and then the lieutenant picked up the phone, their lieutenant. This guy hated us. I mean, I'm not so sure what we did to this guy, but he did not like us. So, as my sergeant told him, well, we have this information that I think would be very useful for you guys. And here's his response. I'm not interested. I don't care. And we're like, what? You don't want the information on our investigation? It could be helpful to you? No. And there was like tumbleweed going by, and he just looks at me, and I look at him, and we're like, okay, well, all right, bye. So we hung up. And that was the last communication we had with the sheriff's department. Well, I then, a couple days later, got with the lieutenant and explained to her the situation in terms of my conclusions and the citations I wanted to issue. And she thought it'd be good to make a formal meeting with the sheriff's department where we could issue the citations to the deputy and have their supervisors present. And I said, that seems like a pretty good idea. Well, Here's an example, by the way, of the tickets I wrote. This is what our tickets looked like back then. These are not the tickets, but it is a good example of what the tickets look like. The red arrows point to a red rectangle. Inside those red rectangles are the statutes which apply to my situation. Now, both of these statutes have subsections, but I just wanted to provide the main statutes. On the left citation, it says 316.183. That's a speed violation. The one on the right is also 316, but 126. It talks about the requirements for the usage of emergency equipment. Here are the rules for law enforcement when in non-emergency situations. Okay, it's called Non-Emergency Driving Rules for Law Enforcement. Obeying traffic laws. Drivers of government-owned or operated vehicles, including law enforcement, are subject to the same traffic laws as the general public. This means an officer is required to follow rules in regards to the speed limits, traffic signals, and parking during non-emergency driving. The lieutenant then made the call, and things went pretty well on the phone with the sheriff's department, and they agreed to the date to meet, and that's what we did. So we set that date, and I told the lieutenant, thanks, and I'll be back in your office on that date, and we'll go and issue those tickets. And she thought that was a great idea. So that was that. You know that wasn't that, right? Within a couple of days, I went to the station to meet with the lieutenant so we could issue the citations. I got to the station, parked my car, I went inside, and she was at her desk, and I said, "Good morning, Lieutenant." And she said, "Good morning, Bob. You might want to sit down for this." And I just look at her and I said, "You have to be effing kidding me." Of course, I didn't use the word effing. I said the actual word. And I then said, "They're just going to make this go away completely, right?" I was so mad. You have no idea. I just saw red. And she just simply replied, "Look, I'm really sorry, but it's completely out of my control." I then said, "Okay, fine. If that's the case, then I want the names of every single person through the chain of command who made this decision, because I'm going to put every single one of them in my report as for the reason why no citations were issued." And she said, "Good. I hope you do. But you do realize the shit's going to hit the fan on this." And I just looked at her and I said, "I know." So I turn on the local news, and lo and behold, there's the sheriff. He's on there lambasting our department, specifically our investigation, and tells the public how we got it all wrong. Our angles were wrong, just everything, our conclusions, everything was all wrong. And I'm like, God. And guess who's standing right next to him? Remember that deputy who got in my car and asked, "Hey, Bob, what did you get for his speed?" Well, she gets up there and says, "Well, it was like putting together a puzzle." I'm like, what? She couldn't put together a puzzle if the puzzle only had 2 pieces in it. Oh my God. Is this mic on? Once again, I turn on the local news and what do I see? Oh, there's my major. He's there to back me up and say the sheriff's department got it wrong and we got it right. Of course, that's not what happened. Here's what he said. And we know this is not true because I already outlined earlier in this video. Well, let me just say what he said. He said, and by the way, this is a quote, he was in the performance of a law enforcement functions. Is that even a sentence? I'm like, God. First of all, he just threw me under the bus because he was not in the performance of a law enforcement functions, whatever that means. I already outlined that's exactly the opposite of what he was. And this is the stuff I had to contend with.
He's dead.
At some point, I don't remember exactly when, my sergeant gets a hold of me and said, listen, I need you to come to my office. I said, okay. So I go to his office and he said, listen, I just got notification through the chain of command that you are not to discuss this case with anyone. He means nobody. That's what the inference was. And he specifically said, and especially not the news media. And I just looked at him and I go, what the hell's going on here? I mean, it's like I'm being sabotaged at every level. And he said, I know, I can't do anything about it. This is just the order and that's it. And I said, well, okay. I mean, what am I going to do? So a couple of days later, I'm working the 3 to 11 shift, 3P to 11P. And I think I was the only one in the station at the time. And this person comes to the counter and she asks, is Corporal Brown here? And I'm like, yes. And she goes, can I talk with him? I go, you're talking to him. And she goes, oh, great. I've been following this case with the deputy fatality. And let me tell you, she goes, something doesn't smell right. Well, I went to their live TV press conference. They handed us a packet of information, but they handed to us like 30 seconds before they do the conference. And I'm like, oh, that doesn't sound too helpful. She goes, no, it's not. So anyway, she goes, I just want to sit and talk with you about this case and get your take on it because everything they said made it sound like you guys really screwed up. And, well, I don't know how to tell you this, but I'm not allowed to talk to you. And she goes, what? I go, yeah. The higher up said I cannot speak with you about this case. But here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go walk back to my office, turn on my computer, and go over this case and have a little discussion with myself about every aspect of it. So I have a full understanding of what took place. Now, if you somehow want to follow me, I mean, I'm not going to stop you. And she follows me all the way to my office. I said, well, I'm going to put some stuff on the screen and you're going to know real quick on how I know what I know. This is proof on how I came to my conclusions. And I showed her the crash angles, the ones I took with photogrammetry, and the one my partner did with the old standard manual measurements. And I did tell her one other thing, but I didn't really tell it to her. I just kind of talked to my computer. it was absurd. But this way, if anything came up, I wasn't technically lying. Was I? So anyway, I said, most people don't realize in the news, and a lot of lawyers don't know this, but there's something called a field note packet. That's the gold mine. That's what you want to look at. I go, in a field note packet, that's everything I gathered from handwritten notes to whatever. Everything goes into this field note packet. And from that packet, you generate a final report. Almost everybody only gets the final report and they don't see the field note packet, but they are able to access the field note packet if they ask. So I said, I'm going to put this field note packet on the table here. And if, somebody wants to rummage through it, it's their decision. Oh my God, she went through it. And I said, you might also find some nice little clues in there, such as proof I wrote the tickets, because the originals are right there in the field note packet. I was ordered to not issue them. And I wasn't saying anything directly to her, by the way. I just kind of kept looking at my computer screen. And then when I did the examples of the photogrammetry with the hand measurements, I took the two images and I raised them up to the light so we both could see, and they lined up perfectly. And she just said, why would the sheriff's department lie about all of this? And I just said, I don't know. I mean, this is something for you to find out. But all of the proof was right there. And she stood up and said, how did they get it so wrong? Well, one day I'm out at mandatory retraining. Mandatory retraining is something that's always ongoing with police departments. It could be something like defensive tactics. It could be CPR. It could be firearms training, just whatever. But there's always some sort of mandatory retraining that you have to do. Anyway, I'm out at DeSoto Correctional Institute, DCI, and, well, better yet, let's take a quick look at it so you can at least visualize that place. Here's an aerial view of the DeSoto Correctional Institute. Let's zoom in a little closer. The red arrow shows the firing range. The brown building is where we did the classroom training. Underneath that area of the green circle, there's a clump of trees, and underneath those trees, there was a metal table typical of what you would see at a prison. I sat right there. Next to me was my sergeant, and across from me was the major. And our entire reason for being at that table was the major wanted to talk about the deputy case. Well, the major popped into the classroom and said, hey, Bob, would you mind if I spoke with you for a minute? Can you come outside? I go, yeah, sure. And I look over at my sergeant. I go, hey, come with me. I need a witness. And he goes, yeah, okay. So we go outside and we sit at that table as I showed you just a second ago. And the major goes, well, Bob, I want to talk to you about that case with the deputy sheriff, as if I didn't know what the case was. And he goes, I noticed you have the sergeant with you. And I go, yeah, I just wanted him here just so he could see everything. And he goes, what's the matter? Don't you trust me? I go, well, let me just say this. I trust him. I trust my lieutenant. And then anybody above them, I wouldn't trust them as far as I could throw them. But in your defense, I do trust you because A, I've known you since Miami, and B, you weren't even here during this case. You're more recent. So it's not personal. It has nothing to do with you. He goes, oh, okay. Well, the thing is, in your report, you referred to the deputy being at fault in some respects. And I go, yeah. And he goes, well, we all kind of disagree with that. We all feel that he was in the performance of a law enforcement functions. Again, with that. And I said, well, no, he wasn't. And I outlined all the reasons why he wasn't, because you already know that as the viewer right now. And he said, well, we feel that he was. And I said, well, you know what? He wasn't. And my report's going to stay the same. And let me just say this. Nothing personal, but have you ever heard the expression, shit rolls downhill? And he goes, yeah. And I said, well, picture this. Picture you and everybody above you through the chain of command is at the top of that hill. And if you look at the very bottom of that hill, you'll see the top of my head where all of this shit lands. I said, I am not changing one word of that report. And it's correct. And here's the other thing. The bottom line is, if something goes wrong, you're all going to blame me. So here's the thing. My integrity stays intact because that's my signature at the bottom of the report, and I am not going to change one word of it. And I must say, the major was really cool with the whole thing. We departed on a friendly note, and my sergeant and I went back to our CPR training. Well, a few months later, John comes up to me and said, John being my traffic homicide partner, he goes, hey, Bob, the sheriff's department's, their report is finished. Let's go get a copy. Their report or their version of what happened in my crash. And I just said, I don't care. I don't want to know, because you know what? Nothing was going to change. So why aggravate myself more? Because I know it was going to be a train wreck. And he goes, well, come on, man, let's just go get a copy. And I said, no, I don't care. He goes, fine. He was like really mad. And he goes, I'll go get it. I go, good, go get it. And so he storms out of the room, and I'm like, I just scream, wait up. And so I went with him, and we got a copy of the report, came back, and he said, hey, let's go through this thing. I go, no, I'm not going through it. If you want to go through it, go through it. Well, he went through it, and he said, listen, look at this. And I'm like, I don't want to know. He goes, no, you need to look at this. I said, okay. And I looked, and he had one of the pages, because the whole thing was a train wreck. And one of the pages was a diagram of the reconstruction of the crash. But here's the problem. It was my diagram, but they altered it. Somebody in that department, and I don't know who, I have my suspicions, but I don't know who, went in there, probably with some scissors, and cut out my cars, and then rearranged those cars, creating different angles, and then created their own report based off of my report and just falsified everything. But here's the thing. The location they placed those cars and the angles, it was impossible for those cars to end up where they did. It was absurd. So, well, that was pretty much that. We just were like, man, and we showed it to our sergeant, and he's just shook his head, and pretty much that was the end of that. And so once again, their deception and lies continued, even in report form. By the way, that's illegal to do that. But, you know, I'm just a regular peon. What am I going to do? Well, the thing is, in retrospect, and even then I knew this, all of this was avoidable. All the sheriff had to do was simply go on TV and say, you know what? Our guy screwed up. He made a mistake, and the appropriate measures were taken by us, and that's the end of it. That would have been the honest thing to do. However, that's not what they did. They chose lies and deceit and deception. But for what? I mean, it didn't work for them because it just made them look bad. You wonder why people don't trust police departments? It's stuff like this. Even my own department, it was complicit as well with this whole debacle. And I later found out, how was it that all these tickets went away of mine? Well, as it turned out, the sheriff and the colonel of my department, they were friends. Somewhere in the background, I guess the sheriff called, excuse me, the sheriff called our colonel and said, hey, can you make all of this go away? And I assume he probably said, sure, no problem. And that was that. But there is more story to our colonel, but I'm not going to go into it because it's kind of pointless. I want to tie up a couple of loose ends here. One is with that reporter. She did go after the sheriff's department, and she went after them with a vengeance and did get the facts out there. So, in a way, I did get a little bit of vindication, I suppose. But in the grand scheme of things, I don't really know if it made a difference or not. Oh well. Also, with the deputy, I was in the lieutenant's office earlier in this video, and I talked about that and how I was told not to issue the citations. And I left this little bit out because I want to save it for this moment. And that is, I told the lieutenant, I said, you know, this guy's going to do this again. And she said, yeah, probably. Fast forward 4 years to 2011. He did it again. Yes. This time, he did 104 miles an hour in a 45 mile an hour zone and killed somebody. Yes, again. Do you know? Well, how would you know? But now you're going to know. This guy had 5 crashes in 6 years. How he stayed on the department is beyond me. What does it take to get fired? I don't know. Anyway, I think in my case, the only thing that really saved him was the guy in the red car from this crash. Well, and this I also saved to this moment, and that is he had a BAC of, by the way, BAC means blood alcohol content, of 0.32. I don't know if you know what that means, but the technical term, I think if you look in the medical books, it's called shit-faced. The legal limit in Florida is 0.08. So this guy was 4 times over the limit. And on top of that, he had traces of cocaine in his system. I think that's what overall saved the deputy. But here's the thing. If that guy was sober, could this have still happened, this crash? Well, it's my contention is yes. And that's because of perception. At nighttime, when headlights are coming towards you, you have no perception or understanding of 114 miles an hour approaching you. So, oh well, you know what? It doesn't matter. But the bottom line is, well, I don't know what the bottom line is. Finally, we're near the end of the story. Yay! I'm at the station one day. This is in late, I think, 2008, way after all of this case went through the rigmarole it did and all of that. And I get this phone call from a lawyer. He represented the family of the red car. And I'm going, oh, hey, what can I do for you? And he said, well, we were able to subpoena and get all of the data from the airbag control module from the deputy's car. I'm like, what? You got the information from that airbag control module? I go, they told me there wasn't any information and there was nothing there at all. He goes, oh no, it was all there. He goes, it wasn't easy getting it, and they tried their best not to get it to me, but I got it. I'm like, God. Okay. So ultimately, what was the speed did you get from that airbag control module? He said, well, I can't really tell you because I'm representing the family and it's all exclusive for my case. And I said, okay. And he goes, I'll tell you what. You tell me the speed you got, and I'll tell you if you're close or whatever. So this particular answer would make or break me. And I just told him, I said, 114 miles an hour. And I expected something way different, whatever. And he simply said, you nailed it. If interested, I do have another YouTube channel. It's called 8 and 35mm Restoration. On that channel, I posted a whole bunch of my old home movies. Some of them I shot in sound and some were silent. Of the silent ones, I did add some music, voiceovers, and sound effects on some of them. I also have a whole bunch of tutorials on how to digitize and process 8mm movies, still photography slides, photographs, and negatives. If you're interested, I did put a link in the description below.